The Phantom Fleet's perfect record, the void between stars, held secrets that most species never lived to discover. In the darkest regions of space, where light from distant suns barely reached, the Kethmoran Shadow Fleet drifted like ghosts hunting prey. Their ships were invisible to most sensors, cloaked by technology that bent space itself around their hulls. For 500 standard years, they had been the galaxy's apex predators. Admiral Xanthic stood in the command center of his flagship, the Voidrender. His elongated form cast no shadow despite the dim lighting, a trait his species had evolved during millennia of living in perpetual darkness. His pale, almost translucent skin seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, and his large black eyes could see across multiple spectrums that other beings couldn't even imagine. The Kethmoran were born to hunt in the dark spaces between worlds. Status report. Navigator Silthan, Xanthic commanded, his voice carrying the authority of countless successful hunts. The younger officers, membrane-like wings, fluttered nervously as she consulted her instruments. The organic displays pulsed with bioluminescent patterns that only Kethmoran eyes could properly interpret. Admiral, the fleet maintains perfect formation, 237 vessels in ghost mode. All psionic dampeners are active, and stealth fields are holding steady. We remain undetectable to conventional sensors. Her voice carried the musical quality typical of their species, though it was tinged with the excitement that always preceded a new hunt. The Shadow Fleet was unlike any other military force in the galaxy. Their ships were grown rather than built, crafted from living metal that could heal itself and adapt to different combat situations. Each vessel was a perfect predator, capable of remaining invisible while striking with devastating precision. But their most terrifying weapon was not technological, it was biological. Excellent, Xanthic replied, his thin lips curving in what might have been a smile on any other species. And the psionic amplifiers, operating at full capacity, Admiral. The Mind Shapers are ready to begin the harvest once we enter the target system. Silthan paused, her expression showing curiosity. Sir, may I ask why this particular system has drawn our attention? The preliminary scans suggest a rather primitive species. Xanthic moved to the organic viewport, watching the stars stream past as they traveled through hyperspace. The Kethmoran had perfected the art of psychological warfare over centuries of conquest. They didn't simply destroy their enemies, they broke them mentally, harvesting not just resources but the very will to resist from entire civilizations. Sometimes, Navigator, the most primitive species, provide the greatest sport, he explained. This system, which the locals call solar, contains a species that has only recently achieved basic faster-than-light travel. They call themselves humans, and according to our scouts, they possess something we have not encountered in quite some time. What is that, Admiral? Stubbornness. Xanthic's black eyes gleamed with anticipation. Our advanced scouts report that these humans have a curious habit of refusing to surrender even when facing impossible odds. They actually seem to fight harder when confronted with certain defeat. It has been many cycles since we encountered such an illogical response to superior force. The bridge crew exchanged glances of interest. Most species they encountered either surrendered immediately upon witnessing Kethmoran technology or collapsed into chaos when exposed to their psionic attacks. A species that fought harder when losing would indeed provide unique entertainment. Tell me about their defenses, Xanthic continued, settling into his command throne, which molded itself to his form like living flesh. Weapons Master Vector stepped forward, his scarred hide bearing the ritual markings of countless victories. Admiral, Their military appears to be concentrated around their home world and several mining colonies. Total fleet strength estimated at fewer than 50 vessels, most of which appear to be converted civilian craft. Their largest warship is approximately 1/3 the size of our smallest hunter-killer. Weapons technology: primitive kinetic weapons and chemical explosives, primarily. Some basic energy weapons, but nothing that could penetrate our adaptive shielding. No evidence of psionic defenses or mental shielding whatsoever. Their minds should be completely vulnerable to our influence. Xanthic nodded with satisfaction. The pattern was familiar, yet the reported stubbornness of these humans intrigued him. Perhaps they would provide a few extra moments of resistance before inevitable surrender. That would make the victory more satisfying for his crew. Communications. Officer Thylek, what have we learned about their society? The communications specialist's tentacles writhed as she accessed the data streams. A fascinating species, Admiral. They appear to have evolved from persistence hunters on their home world. This may explain their reported tendency to continue fighting even when logic suggests surrender. They have a saying, never give up, never surrender. Curious, Xanthic mused. And their leadership structure, fragmented into multiple nation-states and organizations. However, they have recently formed something called the United Human Space Force in response to reports of hostile alien activity in neighboring systems. It appears our reputation precedes us. This was even better. Fear would make the psychological assault more effective. When the Shadow Fleet materialized around their world, the terror would be enhanced by anticipation. The humans would break faster, knowing that the galaxy's most feared predators had finally come for them. Time to target. 18 standard hours. Admiral Xanthic stood and addressed his bridge crew. Prepare the fleet for standard hunting formation. I want Mindshapers ready to begin psychological conditioning as soon as we drop from hyperspace. This will be a perfect opportunity to test our new psionic techniques on a species that thinks it can resist. The crew moved with practiced efficiency, preparing for another routine conquest. The Shadow Fleet had never failed to break a species' will to fight. Their combination of invisible ships, overwhelming firepower, and mind control weapons had proven unstoppable for 5 centuries. The humans would be no different. Deep in the ship's bowels, the Mindshapers began their pre-battle rituals. These Kethmoran specialists had trained for decades to perfect their ability to project fear, despair, and submission directly into enemy minds. They would broadcast waves of terror that would paralyze human decision-making, while simultaneously implanting suggestions of surrender and compliance. Meanwhile, in the Terran system, long-range sensors detected the approaching gravitational disturbances that indicated a large fleet dropping out of hyperspace. The warnings raced through the human communication networks at light speed, reaching Earth's orbital defense stations within minutes. Captain Marcus Rodriguez stood in the command center of the UHSF Resilience, humanity's newest and most advanced warship. Unlike the organic curves of Kethmoran vessels, the Resilience was all hard angles and brutal functionality. Its hull was scarred from countless battles against pirates and raiders, and its weapon ports bristled with kinetic accelerators, missile tubes, and experimental energy cannons. Rodriguez himself was a veteran of humanity's recent colonial wars. At 45, he had earned the nickname Iron Wolf during the Martian independence conflict, where he had led a small fleet of converted cargo haulers against a well-equipped rebel navy and somehow emerged victorious. His dark eyes held the 1,000-yard stare of someone who had seen too much combat. but his jaw was set with the determination that had become legendary among human forces. "Report," he commanded as his bridge crew rushed to their stations. "Sir, massive gravitational disturbances detected at the edge of the system. Whatever's coming, it's big. Computer estimates suggest at least 200 vessels, possibly more." Lieutenant Sarah Chen, his tactical officer, looked pale as she read the sensor data. "Any response from the outer monitoring stations?" "Negative, sir. All stations along the projected entry vector have gone silent in the last 30 minutes. Rodriguez felt the familiar cold not forming in his stomach. He had read the intelligence reports about the Shadow Fleet. Every species that had encountered them told the same story: invisible ships, psychological warfare, and absolute defeat. No one had ever successfully resisted a Kethmoran assault. "What's our current fleet status?" "Resilience is at full combat readiness. We have 12 patrol craft in the inner system, 8 converted freighters serving as missile platforms, and 6 heavy fighters on standby. Earth's orbital defense platforms are armed and tracking, but ... double quotes. Chen's voice trailed off. "But we're facing an enemy that has never lost a battle in 500 years, Rodriguez finished grimly. "I know the odds, Lieutenant. Send a message to all vessels. Prepare for combat. No surrender, no retreat. Sir, perhaps we should consider negotiation. The Kethmoran are known to accept surrender if offered quickly enough." Rodriguez turned to face his bridge crew, and they saw something in his eyes that made them straighten. Unconsciously, it was the same look he had worn during the siege of Deimos, when outnumbered 10-1. He had somehow found a way to turn certain defeat into impossible victory. "The way I see it," he said quietly, "we have 2 choices. We can surrender now and spend the rest of our lives as slaves to aliens who think they're better than us. Or we can show these shadow dwellers what humans do when our backs are against the wall." The bridge fell silent as the crew absorbed his words. They all knew their history. Humanity had never been the strongest, fastest, or smartest species on their own world, but they had outlasted creatures that should have destroyed them through sheer persistence and adaptability. Besides, Rodriguez continued, allowing himself a wolfish grin, "They've never fought humans before. They don't know what we're capable of when we're properly motivated." Across the human fleet, similar conversations were taking place. Captains who had cut their teeth fighting desperate battles against overwhelming odds were preparing their crews for what might be their final fight. They were scared, certainly, but fear had never stopped humans before. In 18 hours, 2 very different philosophies of warfare would collide in the void around Earth. The Kethmoran Shadow Fleet, with their perfect record and absolute confidence in their superiority, would meet the human defenders who had learned long ago that sometimes the only way to win was to refuse to lose. The galaxy was about to learn why humanity had never produced a word that truly meant surrender. When predators become prey, the Shadow Fleet materialized at the edge of the solar system like a nightmare given form. One moment the space around Neptune's orbit was empty, and the next it teemed with vessels that seemed to devour light itself. Admiral Xanthic watched with satisfaction as his ships settled into their hunting formation, invisible to most sensors and completely undetected by the primitive human technology. "All vessels report successful transition, Admiral, Navigator," Silthan announced. "Ghost protocol is active across the fleet. The humans show no indication they are aware of our presence." Xanthic nodded, studying the tactical display that showed the human positions throughout the system. Their fleet was pathetically small, concentrated mostly around their home world with a few scattered patrol groups near the gas giants. It would be like hunting children with military-grade weapons. "Begin the psychological conditioning," he ordered. "I want the mind-shapers to start with their leadership. Break their will to coordinate, and the rest will follow." The psionic attack began immediately. Invisible waves of terror and despair swept across the solar system, targeting the human commanders first. The Kethmoran mind-shapers projected images of inevitable defeat, overwhelming hopelessness, and the futility of resistance directly into their target's consciousness. But something strange happened. Instead of the expected collapse of morale and immediate surrender requests, the human communications networks exploded with activity. Ship-to-ship channels crackled with defiant voices, and rather than breaking, the human formation actually tightened as vessels moved to support positions. On the bridge of the Resilience, Captain Rodriguez felt the alien presence pressing against his mind like a cold weight. Images of defeat flashed through his thoughts, his ship broken and burning, his crew dead, Earth under alien occupation. But instead of despair, he felt something else, entirely a familiar anger that had carried him through every impossible battle. Of his career, all ships, this is Iron Wolf, he broadcast on the fleet frequency. "They're trying to mess with our heads. Don't listen to the voices. Don't believe the visions. Remember who we are. Remember what we're fighting for." Lieutenant Chen looked up from her station, sweat beading on her forehead as she fought against the psychological assault. "Sir, I'm detecting massive gravitational disturbances throughout the outer system. They're here, but I can't get a visual on anything. Invisible ships," Rodriguez muttered, his mind racing through tactical options. Classic predator behavior. Stay hidden until the prey is weakened, then strike from the shadows. He paused, his eyes lighting up with sudden inspiration. But predators have one weakness: they're not used to being hunted themselves. He opened a channel to the entire human fleet. "All vessels, implement Iron Wolf Protocol immediately. I repeat, Iron Wolf Protocol is now in effect." Across the human formation, something remarkable began to happen. Ships that should have been paralyzed by fear instead began to move with sudden, chaotic energy. The neat defensive formations dissolved into what appeared to be random movement. But Rodriguez knew better. The Iron Wolf Protocol was something he had developed during the colonial wars. A tactical doctrine based on humanity's oldest survival strategy, pack hunting. Admiral Xanthic frowned as he watched the human response to his psychological attack. Instead of surrendering or fleeing, they were scattering throughout the inner system in patterns that made no sense. Their movements appeared random, almost panicked, but something about the chaos felt wrong. "Report from the mind-shapers," he demanded. Weapons Master Vector consulted his organic displays, his scarred face showing confusion. "Admiral, the psychological conditioning is not having the expected effect. The humans appear to be adapting to our influence. Some are showing increased aggression rather than submission." "Impossible. No species can resist Kethmoran mind techniques. Sir, perhaps they are simply too primitive to understand what they should be feeling. Their cognitive processes may be too simple to properly process our projected fears." Considered this explanation. It was logical. Perhaps these humans were so basic that they could not comprehend the futility of their situation. If so, they would need to be taught through more direct methods. Begin Phase 2. Deploy hunter-killer groups. Eliminate their largest vessels first, but leave some survivors to witness our power. Once they see their strongest ships destroyed, even primitive minds will understand surrender is their only option. 50 Kethmoran ships detached from the main fleet, still cloaked and invisible. They moved with predatory grace toward the scattered human vessels, targeting the largest and most threatening ships first. The Resilience, as the obvious flagship, was marked for priority elimination, but as the alien hunters closed in, they discovered that the human scatter pattern was not as random as it appeared. Lieutenant Chen had been tracking gravitational disturbances, using humanity's most primitive but reliable sense, pattern recognition. While they couldn't see the alien ships, they could detect the subtle distortions their presence created in local space. "Sir, I'm reading massive distortions approaching from Sector 7. At least 50 contacts, moving fast." Rodriguez smiled grimly. "Perfect," signaled the Pandora and the Defiant move to intercept positions. "Remember, we can't see them, but we can see what they do to space around them." The first Kethmoran strike. Group reached the Resilience and opened fire with weapons that should have torn the human ship apart instantly. Invisible energy beams lanced out, striking the human vessel's hull with devastating force. But instead of exploding or venting atmosphere, the Resilience simply absorbed the punishment and kept fighting. On the Kethmoran flagship, Vector stared at his displays in disbelief. "Admiral, direct hits on the human flagship. Their hull is taking damage, but the ship remains operational. This should not be possible. Explain." "Their armor appears to be designed for absorption rather than deflection. Each hit weakens the overall structure, but doesn't create catastrophic failure. It is as if they built their ships expecting to be shot repeatedly." Xanthic's black eyes narrowed. What kind of species built their ships to withstand continuous punishment rather than avoiding damage entirely? It went against every principle of civilized warfare. The answer came as the Resilience suddenly rotated and began firing into apparently empty space. Kinetic rounds shot out at relativistic velocities, not at where the Kethmoran ships were, but at where they were going to be. The human gunners were using predictive targeting, firing at distortions in space rather than actual visual contacts. Kethmoran Hunter-Killer took 3 tungsten rounds through its organic hull and dissolved into component atoms. Its death scream echoed through the psionic network, the first such cry the Shadow Fleet had heard in 5 centuries. "Impossible," Xanthic breathed. "They cannot see us. How are they targeting our vessels?" The answer came from an unexpected source. The scattered human ships suddenly stopped running and began to converge on the alien positions from multiple directions simultaneously. They had never been fleeing, they had been setting a trap. The Iron Wolf protocol was not about panic or confusion. It was about turning apparent weakness into strategic advantage, Captain. Rodriguez opened a fleet-wide channel as human ships began to emerge from behind asteroids, planetary rings, and debris fields where they had been lying in wait. "All units, they want to hunt in the dark. Let's show them what pack hunters can do." The battle that followed defied every principle of Kethmoran warfare. The invisible alien ships found themselves surrounded by enemies who seemed to anticipate their every move. The humans could not see them directly, but they could see gravitational effects, magnetic disturbances, and energy signatures. More importantly, they had done something no species had ever attempted against the Shadow Fleet. They had made the Predator's greatest strength into a weakness. By remaining invisible, the Kethmoran ships could not coordinate effectively with each other. They could not see what their fleetmates were doing or where they were moving. The humans, meanwhile, were in constant communication, sharing, targeting. data and coordinating attacks with the kind of pack efficiency that had made them apex predators on their own world. "Sir," Chen reported, her voice tight with excitement, "we're getting energy feedback from their cloaking systems. Every time they fire, there's a brief moment where their stealth field fluctuates. If we time it right, do it." The Resilience fired a full spread of missiles just as a Kethmoran cruiser opened fire on a human patrol craft. For a fraction of a second, the alien ship became visible, and the human missiles locked onto it with deadly precision. Nuclear fire blossomed in space as another Shadow Fleet vessel died. Admiral Xanthic watched his perfect record crumbling before his eyes. Ships that had ruled the galaxy for centuries were being destroyed by primitive humans using crude weapons and impossible tactics. The psychological warfare that had broken thousands of species was not only failing, it seemed to be making the humans fight harder. "All vessels, emergency withdrawal," he commanded, his voice carrying a tone his crew had never heard before. Uncertainty. Phase out of combat and regroup at the rally point. But the humans were not finished. As the Shadow Fleet tried to withdraw, they discovered that the humans had anticipated this as well. The scattered patrol craft that had seemed like panicked refugees were actually positioned to block retreat routes. Every time a Kethmoran ship tried to phase out to hyperspace, human vessels appeared to intercept them. Admiral Silthan reported, her musical voice trembling. "The humans have somehow predicted our withdrawal vectors. They are blocking our escape routes with kinetic barriers. How is this possible? They should not understand our tactical doctrine." On the Resilience, Rodriguez allowed himself a moment of satisfaction as he watched the alien fleet struggle against the trap his forces had laid. "The thing about persistence hunters," he said to his bridge crew, "is that we don't just chase our prey until it gets tired. We learn how it thinks. We anticipate where it will run." The battle continued for another 6 hours, with the Shadow Fleet taking losses it had never experienced in 5 centuries of conquest. Ships that had seemed invincible were torn apart by weapons that should not have been effective. Tactics that had never failed were turned against their users. Most shocking of all, the humans seemed to be enjoying themselves. When Admiral Xanthic finally managed to extract his fleet from the system, he had lost over 60 vessels and his perfect record. The remaining ships limped away into hyperspace, their crews shattered not just physically but psychologically. For the first time in 500 years, the Shadow Fleet had been defeated in the aftermath as human salvage crews worked to recover both their own damaged vessels and alien technology. Captain Rodriguez stood on the bridge of his battered ship and looked out at the debris field that marked humanity's first major victory against a galactic-class threat. "Sir," Lieutenant Chen asked quietly, "what do you think will happen now? They'll be back, won't they?" Rodriguez nodded slowly. "Maybe, but they'll never underestimate us again. And word will spread about what happened here. The galaxy is about to learn something important about humans." "What's that, sir?" "That we don't just survive because we're too stubborn to die. We survive because we're too curious to stop learning, too creative to be predictable, and too pack-oriented to ever truly be alone." He paused, watching the stars that no longer seemed quite so dark. They thought they were hunting prey. They found predators instead. The victory at Sol would become legendary throughout the galaxy, not just for the military achievement, but for what it represented. Humanity had faced the ultimate predators and won not through superior technology or overwhelming force, but through the very qualities that had made them successful on their home world: adaptability, persistence, and the ability to turn weakness into strength. The Shadow Fleet would eventually return, but when they did, they would find not the same humans they had first encountered, but a species that had learned from the encounter and grown stronger. And standing ready to meet them would be Captain Marcus Iron Wolf Rodriguez and the Defenders of Humanity, proof that sometimes the best defense is a good hunt. Asterisk.